an 18th century mystic, understood something about addiction that modern rehab still refuses to acknowledge. Emanuel Swedenborg, a scientist, an anatomist, a man who'd mapped the human brain before most doctors knew what neurons were, claimed he could see the spirits that feed on our cravings. And 300 years later, we're still pretending he was crazy. By the end of this, you're going to understand why the spiritual dimension of addiction isn't metaphor or superstition. It's the missing piece that explains why some people can't stop, no matter how much they want to, why relapse feels like something takes over, why the craving doesn't feel like it comes from you. You're going to see how a Christian mystic from Sweden arrived at the same truth that ayahuasca in the Amazon and peyote healers in the desert have known forever, that addiction isn't just a disease of the brain. It's a door left open, and something walks through. This isn't about replacing medicine. This is about completing the picture. Stay with me. You know the feeling. That sudden hunger that arrives from nowhere. Not from your stomach, not from a thought. It just appears, fully formed, like someone else dropped it into your mind. And you think it's you. You think it's your weakness, your lack of willpower, your broken wiring. But what if it isn't? What if the craving you feel right now, in this moment, didn't originate inside you at all? Swedenborg would say it didn't. In March of 1748, this man, who had spent decades studying anatomy, cosmology, and the mechanics of the soul, began keeping a spiritual diary. And in one entry, he recorded something strange. He felt a sudden, intense craving for butter, not hunger, craving. And as he turned his attention inward with the kind of precision he'd once used to dissect cadavers, he saw something, a presence, a spirit. And the craving, he realized, wasn't his. It was being projected into him. Now, butter seems ridiculous. We can laugh at that. But Swedenborg wasn't laughing, because he understood that if the principle was real, if a spirit could insert a desire for something as benign as butter, then the same mechanism could insert a desire for alcohol, for methamphetamine, for anything that consumes, and that changes everything. Because it means the war you've been fighting, the one where you wake up every morning swearing this is the last time, and by evening you're using again, that war isn't just against yourself. You are not just battling a broken dopamine system. You are being influenced by something that doesn't want you to heal. And until you see that, until you name it, you'll keep losing. Swedenborg called them evil spirits. And before you dismiss that as medieval superstition, understand who this man was. He wasn't a priest. He wasn't a mystic by training. He was a mining engineer, a member of the Swedish House of Nobles, the man who first theorized the nebula hypothesis and anticipated the neuron 100 years before science confirmed it. He was rational to the bone, and then, in his 50s, something cracked open. He began experiencing what he described as direct perception of the spiritual world, not visions, not dreams, but waking, sober encounters with beings he claimed were as real as the people in the room. And what he saw there horrified him, because he saw that human beings are not isolated. We exist at the intersection of two realms, the material and the spiritual. And in the spiritual realm, there are beings, what he called spirits and angels, who are drawn to us based on what we love, what we desire, what we're open to. When you crave something, you're not alone in that craving. You're resonating with a presence that shares it. And if that craving is for something destructive, the presence feeding it is not your friend. Swedenborg wrote, "Evil spirits are present with every person and possess his evils." Not metaphorically, actually present. He described them as beings who once lived as humans, died in their addictions and hatreds, and now exist in a state where all they have left is the desire. They can't satisfy it themselves anymore. But when they find a living person whose mind is tuned to the same frequency, someone who's lonely, who's in pain, who reaches for the bottle or the pipe, they attach, and they whisper, not in words, in feeling, in that sudden punch of craving that feels so much like you that you never question it. You think you're deciding, but you're being played. Now here's where I need to ask you something. If this resonates, if you've ever felt like something else takes over when you use, if you've ever wondered why the craving feels alien, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel, because we're going into territory that most addiction content won't touch. We're talking about the soul, about the forces that feed on human pain. And if you're here, it's because you're ready to see the whole picture. Hit subscribe, and let's keep going. Here's the part where science and the sacred starts to bleed into each other. Because what Swedenborg described in 1748 as spirits influencing desire, neuroscience now describes as unconscious drives. Automaticity, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway lighting up before you're even aware you want something. The craving arrives first, the conscious thought follows. And researchers like Robert Sapolsky and Carl Jung have shown that the experience of wanting, especially in addiction, doesn't feel chosen. It feels like it happens to you. You are the last to know. Now, modern science doesn't call it spirits. It calls it conditioning, neural hijacking, environmental cues triggering learnt behaviors. And all of that is true, but it's incomplete, because it doesn't explain why the same substance can devastate one person and leave another untouched. It doesn't explain why two people with identical trauma, identical brain chemistry, identical access to drugs respond completely differently. It doesn't explain why some substances, psilocybin, ayahuasca, peyote, produce experiences of healing, of spiritual awakening, of encountering something benevolent, while others, alcohol, methamphetamine, synthetic opioids, produce possession. Swedenborg would say it's because the substances themselves are doorways, and what's on the other side differs. The word alcohol comes from the Arabic alcohol, which originally meant a fine powder, a cosmetic, but in alchemical texts it came to mean something else, the essence that remains when the material is burned away, a body-eating spirit. And if you trace the root further, you find the word ghoul, an entity that consumes the living. The name is a warning. For 9,000 years, indigenous cultures have used plant medicines in ceremony, not recreationally, but sacredly, with intention, with protection, with elders who know how to open the door and close it again. And those medicines consistently produce encounters with what people describe as loving, teaching presences, entities that show you your wounds so you can heal them. But alcohol, meth, crack, they don't do that. They hollow. Swedenborg saw this. He wrote that certain desires attract certain spirits, and that the spirit of drunkenness is one of the most degrading, because it severs a person from their higher nature, from reason, from the divine. It makes you a puppet. Carl Jung, centuries later, would echo this in his correspondence with Bill Wilson, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Jung told Wilson that alcoholism was a spiritual disease, and that the only cure was a spiritual experience, what he called in Latin spiritus, contra spiritum, spirit against spirit. You can't fight a spiritual force with willpower alone. You need another spirit, a higher one. So what do you do with this? How do you fight something you can't see? Swedenborg's answer is surprisingly practical. You starve it. You stop feeding the desire. Not through white-knuckled willpower, that's fighting on the spirit's terms, but through redirection, through choosing, deliberately and repeatedly, to turn your attention toward something higher. Prayer, service, love, creativity, anything that aligns you with what Swedenborg called the divine. Because just as evil spirits are drawn to evil loves, good spirits, angels, if you want to use his language, are drawn to good ones. When you reach for something sacred, you're not alone in that either. You're resonating with presences that want you whole. Swedenborg described it as influx, a constant flow of influence from the spiritual world into the human mind. You don't control what flows towards you, but you do control what you accept. Every time you feel the craving and you pause, every time you name it as not you, every time you turn toward the light instead of the hook, you're closing a door, and the spirit that's been feeding loses its grip. This is why 12-step programs work for some people, not because of the steps themselves, but because they create a structure of surrender to a higher power. They externalize the fight. You're not doing it alone. You're admitting that you can't do it alone. And in that admission, something else is allowed in. Swedenborg would say that's not psychology, that's reality. You were never meant to fight this by yourself. 300 years ago, a scientist looked into the unseen and reported back what he found. And what he found was that we are not isolated minds in isolated bodies. We are meeting points, battlegrounds, gardens. What grows in us depends on what we water. If you're in the grip of something right now, if you can feel it pulling, if you've tried to quit 100 times and it keeps coming back, I want you to consider this. What if the craving isn't you? What if it's something that's been whispering so long, you forgot it had a voice separate from yours? You don't have to believe in Swedenborg's spirits to benefit from his insight. You just have to be willing to see that the fight is bigger than neurochemistry, that your pain is real, that your desire to be free is sacred, and that there are forces seen and unseen that want you free too. You're not broken, you're under siege. And the way out isn't more shame, it's more light. Turn toward it, name what's not you, and ask for help from something greater. You don't have to do this alone. You were never supposed to. If this landed, subscribe. This channel is for people who are ready to see the whole picture, the science, the soul, the truth beneath the surface. Thank you for being here, and may you find your way home.